The subcommittee will come to order, and I'd like to ask any of our guests, we probably have some seats there you can take advantage of, and I want to recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to welcome you all today. With today's hearing, we begin exercising our important oversight role regarding the approximately $7 billion in taxpayer money the ARRA allocated to the NTIA and the RUS for broadband grants and loans. We'll start to examine what the money is being used for and how we can minimize waste, fraud, and abuse. We'll also consider a staff discussion draft intended to improve oversight and return unused or reclaimed money to the United States Treasury. Let's start that clock. I want to emphasize that this is a discussion draft. It is only a starting point. We hope it will elicit suggestions from our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the witnesses, and any other interested parties to help accomplish a goal I think we all share, that is treating taxpayer money with the utmost care and ensuring that when we do spend it, it gets spent wisely. When we originally considered the broadband provisions of the ARRA in the Energy and Commerce Committee, my colleagues and I suggested some revisions. We were not convinced that this much money needed to be spent. Private sector investment has resulted in 95% of the country having access to broadband and two-thirds of the country subscribing, as the FCC's National Broadband Plan pointed out. We've gone from 8 million broadband subscribers to 200 million in approximately a decade. We propose, therefore, that any subsidies be targeted to the 5% of households that are unserved, and only if it is otherwise uneconomic for the private sector to deploy there. And we thought it would be a good idea to finish the nationwide broadband map before the government started spending the taxpayers' money. Our suggestions were not adopted. We will be interested to see the results and hopefully to learn from the things that work and the things that don't. Measuring performance, I think, is crucial. Otherwise, we won't know what's worth repeating and what we should avoid. A cost-benefit analysis is also important. With a $1.48 trillion deficit this year and enormous deficits predicted for the rest of the decade, we have a responsibility to cut costs. I would suggest, for example, we determine how much we end up spending for each additional broadband subscriber. We ought to know that. All of this is important not just to evaluate the programs at hand. We are, after all, soon to embark on a discussion of how to reform the Universal Service Fund. And the President has also recently announced a goal of reaching 98% of the country with wireless broadband. I laud the goal, but believe we must be cost-efficient about how we go about it and be realistic in our expectations of what taxpayers can afford. In pursuit of this goal of increasing the deployment of wireless broadband to the unserved areas of rural America, it will be important to remember the colloquial definition of insanity, and that is repeating the same actions but expecting a different outcome. While there's been disagreement over provisions in the ARRA, everyone agrees on the importance of oversight. My concerns about possible waste, fraud, and abuse are heightened by the fact that the only funding currently available to the NTIA for oversight expires March 4th with the continuing resolution. My hope is that we can discuss with the Government Accountability Office and the Inspectors General what we should be keeping an eye out for, what they ordinarily do in their oversight roles, and what we can do to help them in that task. The draft legislation is offered in that vein. It would ensure that the NTIA and the RUS report to Congress on any red flags the Inspectors General find, as well as on what they propose to do about it. It would also help ensure that any money that is returned, reclaimed, or goes unused is put back in the U.S. Treasury. One would think that is the ordinary course, but there is some ambiguity in the law about whether and when the program administrators must de-obligate funding and whether it comes back to the Treasury when they do. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the language in the draft bill and where there are things that they suggest we should change. With the minute and a half left, I would like to defer now to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, and yield the remainder of my time.
Well, thank you, Chairman Walden. It's good to see you in the chair. I'm sure we're going to have a very productive subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you and Ms. Eshoo on a wide range of telecommunications issues. This issue is something that shows the subcommittee in its oversight role. We have had a number of concerns about the broadband plan as it was rolled out several years ago. In my position as ranking member, and Mr. Stearns, who's a ranking member of this subcommittee in the last Congress, we wrote several letters to some of you that are sitting at the table asking about how the funds were being spent and where the grants were going. Some of the answers we got back to those letters were, to say the least, unsatisfactory. So today, in the majority, with Mr. Walden as chairman, we're going to ask some of those same questions. We certainly support broadband. We support broadband in rural America, but we also think the money should be spent wisely, effectively, and transparently. So I look forward to the testimony, and Mr. Chairman, again, I look forward to working with you. This is an important subcommittee. The economy of the United States can be very positively impacted by what we do in this subcommittee. So with that, let's have a good hearing, and let's get to work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now am delighted to yield for opening statement purposes to my ranking member on the subcommittee, Anna Eshoo from California. We have already met and talked, and I look forward to a very productive relationship on this subcommittee as we work to improve telecommunications in our country. And so delighted to work with you, and I yield the 5 minutes to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much for your generous comments. I want to return them by wishing you well and congratulating you on being the chairman of this subcommittee, which is really so important, I agree, to our national economy. There are a number of issues that we're going to be working on, and today's hearing, I think, is an important one to examine the dollars that were appropriated. Oversight of the Congress is one of the most important things that we do. So I know that the members on this side of the aisle look forward to working with you. Many of these issues are really nonpartisan. And so I hope that we can come together for the good of the country and produce products that the American people will be proud of and that will benefit the nation. Again, I welcome the oversight of these two programs, of the BTOP and the BIP, because it's important to root out problems. It's also instructive because we then can find solutions to the problems. We need a thorough understanding if, in fact, there are obstacles that applicants and awardees face in gaining access to and utilizing the dollars that Congress appropriated. We have to ensure that the programs are efficient and effective because we all know what the consequences are. In an era where every dollar is just so precious, we want these dollars to dance. We want them to count. The United States of America invented the Internet, but today we're falling behind in broadband deployment, and by some measure we're now ranked 15th in the world. There are different measurements, but the one that eludes us is number one. And I think if we do anything together, that we raise that up and that the United States really take over and be number one in the world. We need significant investment from both the public and the private sectors to close the gaps and increase broadband affordability and ensure that Americans have access to the highest speeds and the latest technology. And I want to repeat that, the highest speeds and the latest technology. That's why I strongly advocated more than 2 years ago for Recovery Act funding to expand broadband deployment in our country, and that's why I raise it. Again, because I think that America should be number one, not 15th or 24th or 17th. If we could build the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1800s, I think that we can certainly do this. So 2 years ago, a study predicted that adding 30 million new broadband lines would raise U.S. GDP by over $110 billion. Others have specifically examined the benefits of broadband stimulus, concluding that a $10 billion investment in broadband networks could support an estimated 498,000 new or retained U.S. jobs for a year. And, Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'd like to ask that that this be the following be placed in the committee's record today. These are all comments from letters of members relative to the program and their support of it.
Without objection.
Thank you. So like the building of our nation's interstate highway system, this transformation won't happen overnight. Recovery Act dollars have begun making their way into communities across the nation, and when completed, these projects will have a critical impact, especially on community anchor institutions, an issue that Congresswoman Matsui and others worked very hard on the committee. Public safety, first responders, schools, libraries, public health facilities. These are all areas that affect every single one of our congressional districts. NTIA and RUS have undertaken a major task in administering their respective programs. Along the way, there have been some bumps in the road, some of which I myself have raised in past hearings and in letters to the NTIA administrator. And these challenges are to be expected, I think, with a multi-year program. So we have an opportunity to strengthen these programs. I'm committed to ensuring that there is success because the country needs this, and I think, in fact, demands it. I think it's clear that our future depends upon the ubiquitous and rapid deployment of broadband, and the Recovery Act is but a first step in this process, and there's much more work to do. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to you again. I don't know how much time I have left, but none. Okay. All right. I'm out of time.
You were perfectly timed to that point.
All right. Perfectly timed to use all the time. Again, my congratulations to you and to all of the members. We look forward to working together with you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll yield for 5 minutes to the Vice Chairman of the committee, a gentleman who has put a lot of time and effort into telecommunications issues, especially a Universal Service Fund over the years, Mr. Lee Terry of Omaha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased that we're exercising our oversight over the broadband provisions of the stimulus bill. While some of us may have wished that the $7 billion allocated for broadband would have been designated for only unserved households, or that we would have waited until the broadband mapping project was completed, we all should agree that it is important for this committee to be involved in oversight now that all the funds have been obligated. We must analyze risks associated with the program and help facilitate proper oversight by the administrating agencies, including our witnesses here today. And thank you all for being here today. Given the current state of our economy and the absolute necessity to cut federal spending now, it is imperative that we do our due diligence in making sure that proper oversight of both BTOP and BIP is conducted and that any waste, fraud, or abuse is eliminated and that any unused or misused money is returned to the Treasury. I realize the fight on unserved versus unserved is, well, some people think it's over. But I do look forward to hearing from our witness, Gary Shorman, today on his concerns about an overbuild that is taking place in rural Kansas due to BIP award. We've received further complaints from Montana, from Maine, from Washington State, from Illinois. So you're not alone. Overbuilding, in my opinion, should be considered as waste and abuse, as we are subsidizing competition in areas that are already being served by broadband providers. Many rural telecommunication companies have raised this issue with me since the stimulus was enacted, and it would seem to me that this would be something the Inspector General would like to examine when conducting oversight. It's my understanding that although awards were obligated by September 30th, 2010, only $300 million of that has been spent to date under BTOP, and less than $100 million has been dispersed under BIP. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on how disbursements will be handled from here on and what kind of performance milestones must be met as to avoid any rescission of funds. I'm worried that oversight could be needed for years to come on a program that was initially intended to be an immediate job creator and needed stimulus in our economy now. I understand that both RUS and NTIA will be challenged by the oversight of a dramatically larger and more diverse portfolio of projects while also facing the impact of a lack of sufficient oversight, staff, and resources. We must make sure they have both their ability to monitor and ensure compliance with the terms of the awards. I welcome a discussion on legislation that will ensure that any unused or reclaimed funds are returned to the Federal Treasury, and hope that we can act quickly but prudently in providing NTIA and RUS the appropriate resources to find these unused and reclaimed funds. And thank you for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Walden, I thank you for scheduling this important hearing, and congratulations on your new role as Chairman of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. And I want to work with you and Ranking Member Eshoo and our members to accomplish important bipartisan objectives. Despite some policy differences, we can accomplish a great deal together. I hope we get started by addressing the spectrum availability and reform, universal service, and the construction of a nationwide interoperable broadband public safety network. We also need to conduct appropriate oversight of ongoing programs and the agencies under our jurisdiction. And I'm pleased that our first subcommittee meeting is an oversight hearing of two important Recovery Act programs, the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program and the Broadband Initiatives Program. When Congress passed the landmark Recovery Act, we built oversight into the very structure of these programs. We knew it was imperative to provide the Departments of Commerce and Agriculture with the tools necessary to conduct vigorous oversight of approximately $7 billion in broadband spending. The Commerce Department Inspector General was allocated $16 million, and the Agriculture Department Inspector General $22.5 million to oversee and audit programs, grants, and activities funded by the Recovery Act. We need to ensure that the IGs and agency program managers have enough resources for this significant task. With billions of dollars invested in hundreds of broadband projects throughout the nation, it would be irresponsible for Congress to skimp on oversight funding. We had a vigorous debate about the merits of the Recovery Act and the broadband programs at the start of the last Congress, and it's clear that Republicans and Democrats did not agree. But even if we continue to disagree on the merits, we should all be able to agree that the agencies and their independent inspectors general should have adequate resources to oversee these projects. I'm encouraged that we're going to hear today from the IGs at the Department of Commerce and Agriculture, as well as the GAO. The Department of Commerce IG and GAO have been warning Congress for months that adequate funding must be assured for these activities. We should heed their advice. In our zeal for budget cutting, we must not trade a temporary savings in the area of oversight for significantly larger future losses due to waste, fraud, or abuse. We'll also hear from Eagle Communications, a company that has concerns about the BIP program and how RUS allegedly funded competitors in its service area to the detriment of Eagle's business. We should listen carefully to these concerns, but it is unfortunate the subcommittee did not invite the RUS administrator to testify today so we could be further enlightened. I'm also pleased that we'll hear from the CEO of the nonprofit Merit Network, a Michigan-based research and education network provider that is constructing more than 2,000 miles of middle mile shared infrastructure to address Michigan's backhaul needs. Dr. Welch, a former Army colonel who served as the Dean for Information Technology at West Point and the Chief of Software Engineering for Delta Force, is also a constituent of Mr. Dingell's. His project has bipartisan support from the Michigan delegation, including Chairman Upton, who has previously noted, quote, "This funding provides a tremendous boost to our region, helping a homegrown business expand and create jobs in an effort to deliver broadband to countless families, businesses, schools, libraries, and health centers across the state," end quote. Finally, we have before us a Republican legislative proposal to recapture deobligated recovery funds. None of us should oppose the prompt return of unused Recovery Act funds to the U.S. Treasury, and I believe that is what current law requires. We should discuss how this new law, this new legislation differs from existing statutory requirements. We also should be careful not to establish a process to defund projects without good cause, especially now that obligated money has been translated into real projects with real jobs in every state. I would like to thank our witnesses for their participation at this hearing, and I look forward to their testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank the gentleman from California. I just, for the record, note that we have met with the RUS administrator. We will have additional hearings. The RUS administrator actually is out of the country right now, and so we're going to go ahead with this part, and then we hope to have another hearing where they're available. Now I'd like to recognize the chairman emeritus of the committee, Mr. Dingle, who would like to welcome our witness, Dr. Donald Welch, who's president and CEO of Merit Network. So with this, I would yield to the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingle.
Mr. Chairman, you are most courteous. I thank you for your graceful treatment of me and my constituent, and I congratulate you on your first hearing, which is an important one. I want to welcome our witnesses today, particularly Dr. Donald Welch, the president and the CEO of Merit Network Incorporated, which is based in my district in Michigan. Merit is a recipient of over $100 million in grants from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, BTOP, to extend the broadband internet infrastructure to anchor institutions and underserved areas in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So welcome, Dr. Welch, and we wish you great success in Merit's very valuable project. Federal support for infrastructure projects such as yours support economic growth, will help our country to recover from current recession, and also are going to be very useful in moving this country forward in terms of technology, which is so important. Again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy to me and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and with that, Dr. Welch, if you'd like to be our lead-off witness, just go ahead and make sure your microphone's turned on, and we look forward to your testimony. We appreciate your being here, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Don Welch. I'm the president and CEO of Merit Network, and I'm very proud to be here on behalf of Merit Network and its community in Michigan. Merit Network, as you've heard, is an independent non-for-profit that is governed by the public universities. Merit receives no subsidies from the state. Our mission is to provide community anchor institutions with advanced IT and network services to foster collaboration in community and to facilitate knowledge transfer with and between community anchors. Merit is guided by a vision of equal access to information for all Michigan citizens, regardless of geographic location. For almost a decade, Merit has had a plan to build fiber to serve community anchor institutions in rural and remote regions of Michigan, where an absence of viable backhaul has left entire communities underserved. But we have lacked the funds to do so. Through BTOP and with support of the Michigan Public Universities, Merit's vision is within reach to the benefit of all sectors of society and the entire state. Merit's project is 2,287 miles of fiber optic cable lit at 10 gigabit speeds that provides both middle mile or backhaul infrastructure in underserved areas and redundant paths out of poorly connected areas that will improve service for the entire region. Merit and its commercial subrecipients will each own infrastructure. Merit serving the community anchors, the subrecipients focusing on homes, businesses, and local internet service providers. Our project will directly connect over 100 community anchor institutions and has the ability to serve an additional 900 community anchors. The network will also have access points in 51 central offices and create 12 new co-location spaces, making it easy for existing providers to leverage the project. Thus, the network can indirectly serve over 55,000 businesses and 1 million homes. The majority of the costs for many local ISPs in the service area are for backhaul to internet exchange points that are in places like Chicago. Our project provides cost-effective backhaul to areas where it is lacking. In some instances, customers could see over 10 times the bandwidth for less than half of what they're currently paying. Merit is a member of the Schools, Healthcare, and Libraries Broadband Coalition because we share their belief that high-capacity broadband is the key infrastructure that K-12 schools, universities, colleges, libraries, healthcare providers, and other community anchors need to provide 21st century education, information, and public services. Community anchor institutions also need access to a private network of peer organizations for the exchange of information, consolidation, and sharing of services. The Merit Network is the platform our members use to collaborate, cut costs, and provide better service to their constituents and patrons. Our project will eliminate geographic barriers for Michigan community anchor institutions. Merit has members in the Upper Peninsula that are further away from Merit's offices in Ann Arbor than we are right now in D.C. from Ann Arbor. This project will enable them to collaborate with members across the state as if they were across town. The project is not without risk. The BTOP grants provide 80% of the estimated capital cost of the project. Merit and the subrecipients are responsible for 20% and the maintenance of the completed work. Merit is responsible for cost overruns and operational costs during construction. We've drawn on our existing staff to support the project before we can reduce costs or generate any revenue. Even exceeding the budget by 1 penny per foot on construction and materials means an additional cost of $120,000 for us, a substantial amount. We have every incentive to spend the money wisely. Merit controls the project and mitigates its risk in several ways. A competitive RFP process is used to select vendors. Merit has established a process for handling all federal funding. We vetted the process with a red team exercise in which we tried to anticipate every way someone could get improper access to the funds. Merit has hired 4 BTOP-funded staff to support our reporting and compliance team. That team includes a librarian, as we expect to have over 100,000 auditable documents by the project's completion. The impact of our project's success will be profound and long-lasting for Michigan, which is working hard to revitalize its economy. We believe that education and economic development are inseparable. The 2 key components necessary for economic development are an educated workforce of lifelong learners and unfettered access to the global information grid. Our project targets both, creating knowledge infrastructure upon which Michigan will compete and grow in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Dr. Welch, thank you, and I would be remiss not to also thank you for your many years of service in the U.S. Army and your teaching at West Point. We appreciate that. Now I'd like to move on to Mr. Gary Shorman, President and CEO of Eagle Communications. Mr. Shorman, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement. We thank you for participating in our hearing today.
And thank you for being here. My name is Gary Shorman. I'm President and Chief Executive Officer of Eagle Communications, a small business that's based in Hays, Kansas. And I appreciate being invited today to talk about my experience on the impact of how the Recovery Act Broadband Initiative Program, or BIP, has had on our company. Eagle offers high-speed internet, high-definition cable television, and digital telephone service to our communities throughout central and northwestern Kansas. In the last 5 years alone, we have invested over $20 million to make sure our customers have cutting-edge technology for broadband and broadband speed. Our company has 277 employees, of which 212 are employee owners through our employee stock ownership plan. That means that our employee owners live, work, and volunteer their time in the communities that we serve. We like what we do, and we like where we do it. Eagle strongly supports the primary goals of the BIP program. Broadband is a critical driver in the economic recovery and global competitiveness, especially in rural Kansas and rural America, because it provides and creates jobs and provides for better educational opportunities. Our concern with the program, however, is that how it's been implemented in certain funded projects may actually frustrate the goals of BIP. My testimony today will explain part of my concerns. In January 2010, the RUS announced a $101 million BIP award, nearly one-third of the money awarded in round one to one of our competitors, Rural Telephone Service Company, that's RTS. We were stunned that while the award's announcement stated that it would be used to provide, quote, service in an area that was 99.5% underserved or unserved, RTS announced that the money would be used to build part of their plant and upgrade their network in Hays. Hays is one of the best served for technology in western Kansas. Eagle, AT&T, and RTS's own affiliate, Nextech, all provide high-speed broadband service there. A report last month on the availability of broadband in Kansas showed that 99.99% of the customers in Ellis County, where Hays is the home, is the county seat, already have access to broadband and high-speed broadband. The fact that Hays was one of the communities actually covered by this award was particularly surprising, one, because we'd done our best to determine whether Hays was even included in the RTS application, and secondly, we tried to inform the RUS of the extensive broadband service already available there. A RUS field representative actually made a stop and a visit in Hays. The fact is that while the RUS argues that this project meets the technical requirements for BIP funding, it certainly violates the spirit and the intent of the Recovery Act and BIP's own rules. It also demonstrates a serious flaw in the award process. While much of the geographic area covered by the award may be technically unserved, almost half of the 23,000 homes in this project, homes and businesses within this project, are actually in Hays. This means that millions of federal dollars will go towards overbuilding Eagle and other service providers in this non-rural area. With this award, the government is effectively penalizing small companies like ours that has invested its own risk capital in this network. Companies that have taken financial risks of serving rural markets and serving them well, it's unrealistic to expect us to continue to do so if we have to face large government competition. Moreover, wasting valuable time and dollars to overbuild a community that is well served at the expense of unserved Kansans and unserved others, that just doesn't make sense. Eagle is happy to face competition from other providers, but we cannot effectively compete with a government-backed favorite. RTS has already gained millions from government-supported programs. Even prior to the $101 million BIP award, RTS received millions of dollars in assistance from the RUS on 32 other projects in the same area, and they've received millions of dollars from federal and state Universal Service Fund programs. It is clear to us that the BIP award to RTS will have a serious impact on our business. RTS has approached every Hays resident and asked for permission to install for free network boxes on their home, and they're offering those who grant that permission a chance to win a free 50-inch HD TV, maybe a laptop computer, even an iPad. It's unreasonable to expect a privately funded company to match these free offers and expect to compete against this kind of funding. I'm here to ask that this committee consider legislation that would require wasteful funding to be returned to the Treasury so that it can be used for other more pressing and more needed services, and that assume a more active oversight role over funding of awards to ensure that our Eagle experience is not unnecessarily repeated. RUS should also be required to defund RTS's project in the Hays non-rural area and other places where BIP funds were spent in manners contrary to the goals of the program. Taxpayer dollars should not be wasted in an area that is already being well served at the potential cost of jobs, lost competition, and lost additional investment by private companies. Again, thank you for inviting me to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Shorman, thank you for your testimony today. It's most helpful in our look at this issue. I would now like to recognize Mr. Mark Goldstein, Director of Physical Infrastructure Issues from the Government Accountability Office. Mr. Goldstein, you have 5 minutes. We appreciate the good work your agency does, and we look forward to your comments and testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in this hearing to discuss oversight of the broadband programs funded through the Recovery Act. As you know, access to broadband service is seen as vital to economic, social, and educational development, yet many areas of the country lack access to or the residents do not use broadband. To expand broadband deployment and adoption, the Recovery Act provided $7.2 billion to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration and the Rural Utilities Service for grants or loans to a variety of program applicants. The Congress subsequently rescinded $300 million of this funding. The Recovery Act required that agencies awarded all funds by September 30th, 2010. This testimony summarizes and updates two prior GAO reports, including one, NTIA and RUS's efforts to award Recovery Act broadband funds, and two, remaining risks that NTIA and RUS face in providing oversight for funded projects. NTIA and RUS awarded grants and loans for several hundred broadband projects in two funded rounds. By the end of FY 2010, NTIA and RUS awarded grants and loans to 553 broadband projects across the country. These awards represent almost $7.5 billion in obligated funds, which exceed the $7.2 billion provided by the Recovery Act, because an agency such as RUS that awards loans can obligate funds in excess of its budget authority. In our review of the first funding round, we found that NTIA and RUS, with the help of agencies' contractors, consistently substantiated information provided by award recipients' applications. We have not evaluated the thoroughness of the process used by agencies in the second round. Because of the challenges the programs faced and what we've previously reported, we recommended that NTIA and RUS take several actions to ensure the funded projects receive sufficient oversight. These recommendations included the following. One, that NTIA and RUS develop contingency plans to ensure sufficient resources for oversight of funded projects beyond FY 2010, and that the agencies incorporate into their monitoring plans steps to address the variability in funding levels for program oversight beyond 2010. 2, that NTIA and RUS should use information provided by applicants to establish quantifiable outcome-based performance goals by which to measure program effectiveness. 3, that NTIA should determine whether commercial entities receiving BTOP grants should be subject to an annual audit requirement. We can report that NTIA and RUS have taken several actions to address these recommendations and improve oversight. These actions include that NTIA has developed and is beginning to implement a post-award framework to ensure the successful execution of BTOP. This framework includes 3 main elements: monitoring and reporting, compliance, and technical assistance. As part of its oversight plans, NTIA intends to use desk reviews and on-site visits to monitor the implementation of BTOP awards and ensure compliance with award conditions by recipients, and intends to provide technical assistance in the form of training, webinars, conference calls, workshops, and outreach for all recipients of BTOP funding. RUS is also putting into place a multifaceted oversight framework to monitor compliance and progress for recipients of BIP funding. Unlike NTIA, which is developing a new oversight framework, RUS plans to replicate the oversight framework it uses for existing grants and loan programs. The main components of RUS's oversight framework are financial and program reporting and desk and field monitoring. According to RUS officials, no later than 30 days after the end of each calendar year quarter, BIP recipients will be required to submit several types of information to RUS, including balance sheets, income statements, statements of cash flow, summary of rate packages, and the number of broadband subscribers in each community. In addition, RUS intends to conduct desk and site reviews. RUS extended its contract with ICF International to provide BIP program support through 2013. According to RUS, the agency fully funded the contract extension using Recovery Act funds, and no appropriations are required to continue the contract until fiscal year 2013. In addition, RUS extended the term of employment through fiscal year 2011 for 25 temporary employees assigned to assist with the oversight of BIP projects. Last spring, NTIA reported that for-profit awardees will be required to comply with program-specific audit requirements set forth by the Office of Management and Budget under the Single Audit Act. This audit and reporting requirement will give NTIA the oversight tool it needs to help ensure that projects meet the objectives of the Recovery Act and guard against waste, fraud, and abuse. Finally, despite these actions, NTIA and RUS have not fully addressed all of our recommendations, and we therefore remain concerned about the oversight of the broadband programs. First, NTIA's oversight plan assumes the agency will receive additional funding for oversight. For fiscal year 2011, the President's budget requested included nearly $24 million to continue oversight activities, and funds in the CR expire shortly. NTIA reported that it is imperative that it receive sufficient funding to ensure effective oversight. RUS's oversight activities, which the agency in part addressed through the extension of its contract with ICF International. However, should there be a reduction in RUS's fiscal year 2011 budget and beyond, the agency will need to assess the fiscal impacts and the temporary employment of these staff members. Therefore, we believe the agencies, and especially NTIA, need to do more to ensure their oversight plans reflect current fiscal realities. Second, we continue to keep our recommendations open regarding performance goals. NTIA has taken some steps on this recommendation, such as creating goals related to new network miles and workstations deployed, but the agency continues to establish additional goals, and that work is not yet complete. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Goldstein, thank you. Thanks again for your work on this issue and for your advice and counsel. I'd now like to recognize the Honorable Phyllis K. Fong, Inspector General, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Mrs. Fong, we appreciate your input today and the work that you and your folks do, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to testify this morning about our work in this broadband program. As you may know, over the last 10 years, RUS has administered programs intended to provide broadband service to rural areas that lack these services. We did audits of these programs in 2005 and 2009, and our most significant findings were that RUS was funding projects in communities close to major metropolitan areas rather than in more rural areas, and that RUS was funding projects in areas that had pre-existing broadband service. We made a number of recommendations to RUS to help RUS improve the management of its programs and to focus funding on rural communities. RUS agreed with many of our recommendations, but it has not yet fully implemented its corrective actions. We recognize in the OIG's office that recent legislation, such as the 2008 Farm Bill and the Recovery Act, has actually partially addressed some of the concerns that we raised. But we also believe that the basic policy goals and management challenges still exist with respect to delivery of these programs, and so we will continue our work with Russ to address these issues. Let me briefly talk about fraud in the program. One of the things that our investigations have revealed is that in some instances, broadband providers receiving Russ funds have engaged in fraud and other criminal conduct. We have had some successful prosecutions where broadband companies have been convicted of submitting fraudulent invoices and claims, and as a result, those companies and some of those individuals have had to make restitution to the government and have received prison terms and other probationary terms. One company has in fact been debarred from doing business with the government for 5 years as a result of our investigative work. With respect to oversight of the Recovery Broadband Program, as you all know, the Recovery Act provided $28 billion to USDA across 9 major mission areas. Of this amount, $2.5 billion was allocated for broadband. When we started to assess the risk involved, we reached out to GAO and coordinated closely with them. We understood that GAO was going to perform a multi-agency review of these programs, and so we decided to hold in abeyance our own oversight until GAO had finished its work, which it appears is now an appropriate time. And so at this time, we are planning to initiate audit work within USDA OIG on Russ's broadband program to determine how effectively it is running. We have not finalized our audit program, but the kinds of issues that we are considering include the adequacy of Russ's oversight functions, Russ's use of a contractor, eligibility of borrowers and grantees, assessment of any delinquent or defaulted loans, and basically the use of program funds for authorized purposes. While we develop our program, we will be working very closely with Commerce, GAO, and FCC to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts, and we expect to roll out our initiative in the spring of this year. So that concludes my statement, and I welcome any questions.
Ms. Fong, thank you for your participation in our hearing and for the work that you do. I'd now like to recognize the Honorable Todd J. Zinser, Inspector General, U.S. Department of Commerce. Mr. Zinser, we appreciate your work and that of the folks who work with you on these efforts, and we look forward to your testimony, sir. Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today about our oversight of the Recovery Act broadband spending at the Department of Commerce. My testimony this morning can be summarized in 3 points. First, the Broadband Technologies Opportunities Program was a high-risk program from the outset, and now that the grants have been awarded and federal funds obligated, the risk is elevated because the grantees are now beginning to spend the money that they've received through their grants. Only about 5% of the broadband funds have been spent so far. The Recovery Act established $4.7 billion Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, or BTOP, 2 years ago. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration was given responsibility for the program. The agency and its very dedicated workforce have made a Herculean effort in implementing the program so far. Nonetheless, it remains a high-risk program. The agency successfully awarded and obligated $3.9 billion to 232 grantees by last year's deadline. Approximately $3.4 billion is funding 123 infrastructure projects, including 7 public safety broadband networks. $200 million is funding 65 public computer centers, and $251 million is funding 44 projects for what's called sustainable broadband adoption. In addition to these broadband grants, NTIA has also awarded nearly $300 million to 56 states, territories, and the District of Columbia to develop digital maps of broadband coverage for their jurisdictions. The large dollar amounts involved, the number of grants, the mix of grant recipients, which include government, not-for-profit, for-profit entities, higher education, and Native American tribes, all with different levels of experience with federal grants, the technical nature of many of the grants, and the relative inexperience of the agency and its staff in administering such a large grant program all contribute to making this the most complex grant program NTIA has ever administered, and the highest risk Recovery Act program for the Department of Commerce. Second, the NTIA staff must now shift its attention and efforts from awarding the grants to managing the grants and conducting oversight, making sure the recipients are properly spending the money and delivering on their broadband projects. For example, the program requires and the grantees have agreed to match the federal funds with funds of their own. In addition to the $3.9 billion in federal funds, the grantees themselves have agreed to apply another $1.4 billion to these projects. NTIA has to make sure that the matching funds committed by the grantees are real funds and not funds that exist only on paper or as a result of creative accounting treatments we have seen sometimes in our audits of other grant programs at the department. I am concerned that without real matching funds, these projects could wind up underfunded and result in incomplete projects or lower quality projects. There are many other aspects of oversight that NTIA must carry out. They have a sound approach and oversight plan, but the agency must embrace their oversight role and must have the resources to do so. Finally, it is important that we all remain vigilant in preventing and detecting fraud. Transparency and accountability was made a key element of the Recovery Act. The reporting requirements and visibility of the spending for these projects is unprecedented. It is ultimately intended to keep the recipients of Recovery Act funds honest so that the taxpayers get what they paid for. Over the past 2 years, members of OIG staff have delivered fraud awareness and grant compliance briefings to almost 3,400 NTIA and Commerce employees and BTOP applicants and recipients. These briefings not only provided technical assistance on grant compliance issues, but were also intended to let employees and grantees know how to recognize and report suspected fraud. Our focus will continue to be on compliance and fraud prevention and detection as the projects are carried out over the next few years. We especially appreciate the subcommittee's oversight and the invitation to testify this morning and look forward to working with the subcommittee on this important program. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zinser, thank you, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for your terrific testimony today. It's most helpful in the work that we're doing here. I'll start with questions. Ms. Fong and Mr. Zinser, while I recognize the staff discussion draft of our legislation may not have all the right language yet, do you think it would be helpful if the standards and processes for deobligating funds were less ambiguous? I'll start with that. In the kind of work that you do and what we're trying to do, I guess the question is do you think it would be helpful to have a clear standard?
I'll just take a crack at that. I don't believe in any of our audit work that we have identified difficulties in the past. We did make a number of recommendations in one of our audit reports that Russ go back and get money back from some grants that had not been well performed. And we understand that RUS is still working through that process. Now, it has taken some time to do that, so perhaps a recognition of the time involved would be helpful. One of the things that we did notice in terms of the draft legislation is that it talks in terms of awards, grants and awards. And given the nature of the broadband program at USDA, which is usually a funding package of 75% grant, 25% loan, which can vary, of course, we weren't sure whether the legislation addresses the issue of what happens to the loan piece of the package. The legislation seems to be clear about what happens with respect to the grant side, but then the accompanying loan that a recipient may have, is that considered part of an award, or do we need to be more clear about that so that as recipients go through the process, they understand exactly what's on the table? So we would suggest a look at that language.
Excellent. Thank you. That's most helpful. Mr. Zinser?
I do think it would be helpful to eliminate any ambiguity. I know, for example, there's provisions in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill that talks about unobligated money in the Recovery Act going back to the Treasury. So, and we're also aware of various amendments to pieces of legislation about rescinding or taking back Recovery Act money. So I think it would be a good idea for the subcommittee to kind of make its mark on what they want to happen with Recovery Act money. That being said, our experience with the grant programs in the department is that it is a long, drawn-out process. Once the IG's office identifies a cost on a grant project that we don't think should be paid out or are unallowable, it's a long process, a long due process in getting the agencies to actually make a decision, give the grantee an opportunity to make its case, and actually decide that certain costs are unallowable. I think that whatever legislation comes about needs to make sure that that due process that due process stays in place.
So let me ask you a couple other questions then. Under current law, is the decision to deobligate funds by the RUS and NTIA administrators discretionary? Is there a clear standard? And could an award recipient continue to spend money even if you've found waste, fraud, and abuse, and even if you've recommended remedial action? So the first part of that, is there a clear standard? Well, actually, is the decision to deobligate discretionary? We believe it is.
That's my understanding as well.
Yes, I believe it is discretionary, sir.
That's one of the issues we have with this legislation then. Is there a clear standard to deobligate?
I know that in the case where we will conduct an audit and recommend that certain costs be unallowed, that ultimately the decision is left up to the agency, and it's an interpretation of accounting rules in a lot of cases, sir.
Exactly.
Is that the same as Fong?
Exactly.
And could an award recipient continue to spend money even if you found waste, fraud, and abuse, and even if you've recommended remedial action?
If the agency does not take proper action, I would say yes, the grantee could continue to spend money. We find, for example, that even agencies that have been convicted of fraud, if the agency doesn't check the excluded list before they make the grant award, that entity can get that grant and spend that money.
And given the nature of the process is that we as IGs will go in and do an audit, and we'll make a recommendation to the administrator, say. The administrator then has some certain due process procedures that they follow with respect to the recipient. And as Mr. Zinser alluded to, that process can take some time. So while that process is ongoing, the recipient still has the responsibility to perform on the grant or loan. And so one would expect that that performance would continue. And so depending on the length of time that the due process takes, things could be unresolved for a while.
My time has run out. I appreciate your comments. I would recognize now the ranking member, Ms. Eshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses. Ms. Fong, when you spoke in your testimony, I think it's important to state for the record where there was a clear misuse or fraud, or I don't remember exactly which word you used.
Fraud.
Those were not Recovery Act funds, correct?
Correct. We do not have any investigations of
I
Recovery Act
just wanted to make sure that that's clear for the record, because the hearing is about the Recovery Act, what it established, does it have shortcomings? If there are, what are they, and what can we do about it? So I think that that's very important. On Mr. Shorman, you're not happy. And, essentially, I think what I heard you say your beef is that essentially the government is competing with you, and that an award was made for an area that is what, heavily populated, and that there's overlap. In your view, is there anything built into this that would create competition in any of these areas? Or is it in your view that they only be awarded and that there be a sole operator for the build-out of broadband funds, for the build-out of broadband?
Well, I can report from kind of out in the front line where I am. I know.
No, just answer my question.
Well,
I don't have a lot of time.
Well, in the process of doing this, if you're looking at the legislation and asking how that would work, obviously I think this is a good first step. but it seems to be there's a lot of discretion put into how these agencies actually award this, and the ability for Ms. Fong and others to go in and say something's wrong. Call timeout and say something's wrong with this process to make
we'll
it work.
deal with the government agencies and their overview, and we're going to have to make sure that you have money to do oversight and all of that. Otherwise, we're all in trouble. But I want to get to your beef. What brought you here? What's your problem?
Our community.
What is it that you think needs to be fixed?
We had an award grant to a competitor of ours that actually overbuilds our community. Our community is a non-rural community of 20,000 plus people. Their award, which I understand over half of the money in this total award is being used to overbuild our community and provide a competitive service to us and others in our community.
Did Eagle ever apply for BIP funds?
Eagle did apply. Eagle did. We were naive in that
by other
process.
providers?
We were naive in that process. We applied for funds in areas that we felt were unserved. We applied for that. We didn't apply to overbuild other people or do that. And in the process, we were rejected. I think the actual quote was, in one area that actually had another loan applied, we failed to demonstrate that we met the criteria for being unserved in that area.
Was that the only reason that that you withdrew your?
That was the only reason that we received. And that was one of the applications that happened to get funded in the same project by Rural Telephone Service.
Well, so you were rejected.
We were
You're saying that
rejected.
you were rejected and someone else wasn't. Is that your beef?
Well, it doesn't say this in the application. It says that we failed to meet the criteria.
I just want you to tell me what. I'm trying to get to the heart of what brings you here today.
The heart of it.
So unhappy.
The heart of it is that we're wasting government dollars, taxpayer dollars, my dollars, to provide a competitive service in the markets that we serve, markets that have multiple broadband providers.
That in going into underserved areas, I don't know of an application that doesn't have some overlap. You even acknowledge that your own application had overlap. So are you saying that overlap in this should be totally eliminated, or is not fair, or
our
tell me what it is.
application focused on unserved areas that did not have broadband providers. This application nearly half of the application overlaps a community that has multiple broadband providers.
Well, do you think that if there is a multiplicity of broadband providers that isn't good for the consumer?
If it is a fair playing field where I have a chance to get government grants, everybody gets government grants, there has to be a fair playing field for being able to provide service. If one provider has a boatload of government taxpayer money, it just makes it very hard for a private small company like ours to compete.
What I'm struggling with is the following, and that is that you're saying essentially the government is too hard to compete with, and I understand that. It's much larger than Eagle and a lot of other companies put together. But that they're in going into underserved areas, that there is a spillover, and you're not acknowledging that.
I grew up on the farm. I understand unserved areas. If you're unserved, that is what the program is for. It's not for overbuilding major non-rural communities.
Okay, thank you.
Gentlelady's time's expired. I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And no one, well, a lot of people have a great respect for Anna Eshoo, and I'm one of her biggest fans on the stuff we do on. But I want to follow up on this line because it really tells the same story that happened in my congressional district. Mr. Shorman, I think what helps answer this question is, if you were to build in a community of like size, what would be your cost of capital?
One, it would be a tremendous cost because you have to go through.
What we're talking about, what would you have to borrow?
My guess is, in our case, we would do it differently. We're a private company. We fund things differently. We do things differently.
What would it cost?
We haven't shown in Hayes, but say it $30-40 million for a company.
So when the government gives a grant to a competitor, what's their cost of capital?
Well, in this particular case, their cost is going to the government. It's a whole different process than going to a private institution to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the grant is a grant.
The grant
is free money.
It's $50 million, and the
free money. Our taxpayers' money overbuilding a competitor who pays taxes. That is why we messed up royally when we did not go by the broadband map. When we don't develop a map and you don't know the direction of which you're heading, then you subsidize competing entities. You give taxpayer money to companies to compete against people who are providing the level of service that we want across the country. I have what we think is now a recent one, just got it today. The light area, 0 to 2,000. Darker areas, these are areas that are unserved or underserved. And we still don't have good maps. So we gave money to a competitor of yours, a grant. They didn't have to borrow it. They don't have to pay interest on it. And they're competing with you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Isn't that the beef?
It's the beef that it makes it really tough for a private employee-owned company to compete against the government with taxpayer dollars that I pay a part of. Correct.
And that's why when we had the markup of the bill, why we tried to, on our side, say, let's have this debate of underserved and unserved. And if we're going to spend taxpayer dollars, let's have taxpayers go to unserved areas. Would you have had a beef if this company came in and said, we want a grant and we're going to an area that's not served?
I think that's the perfect part of this program, to reach unserved Kansans, unserved Americans with the project.
Would that have met the goals of the administration on the broadband plan?
From my standpoint, it would have been exactly what they were looking
When we give taxpayers money to overbuilding an area, doesn't that delay our ability to reach our broadband plan for the country?
It certainly refocuses money to people that already have multiple providers. And then as the result of people on that map you've shown, there are those areas that don't have broadband. And so those people then don't have the resources that they need.
And there are stories like this all over the country. And there's one in my district, too. And so I'm going to turn to Mr. Zinser and Ms. Fong. In my district, I have an incumbent provider who currently exceeds the broadband guidelines being published and considered by the FCC in the development of a national broadband plan. They are providing speeds of 10 megabits down and 1 megabit up in all communities they serve. They also continue to invest private capital, cost of business, capital formation, to surpass the FCC broadband deployment speeds. You can imagine they were shocked to hear that another provider would be moving into their service area who had committed to providing wireless service at 3 megabits. Now, this entry came how? How did this new entry come into the market? The federal government. A grant. Overbuilding, competing services that meet the national broadband plan. This story gets worse because this company then immediately sells to a business. So they get the government money. They then sell out to a larger company. Was that your plan, Ms. Fong?
Well, just
is that what we
just
wanted
to
do? Is that what we really, was that our plan?
I don't know. I'm the Inspector General and
All right, let's
not
go to Mr.
responsible for
Zinser.
delivery of the
Was
program.
that the plan?
Well, we are responsible for overseeing the program. We're not responsible for running the program, but it doesn't really sound like that should be part of the plan, sir.
I agree. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Someone yields back his time now. According to my list here, we go to Mr. Barrow, as departed. And then we'll go to Mr. Markey, who's not here. So then next on the list is the distinguished Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Dingle, for 5 minutes.
Question to Dr. Welch. Doctor, to what extent does Merit rely on NTIA's staff with respect to technical assistance, guidance, and the prevention of waste, fraud, and abuse?
Sir, we rely extensively on our federal program officer and the rest of the NTI staff. The program that we're under is a complex program, and our federal program officer is our single point of contact. He knows our program as well as people in our organization do. He knows us. When we come to him with a problem, he helps us solve it. He keeps us out of trouble as we try to understand the rules and regulations that can sometimes seem conflicting to make sure that we're not inadvertently breaking any of the rules. He serves as an advocate. He serves as an overseer. He serves so many roles. I do not think we could successfully complete the project if we did not have a dedicated federal program officer.
Thank you. Now, Doctor, as you may well be aware, NTIA stands to lose funding for oversight of BTOP. If NTIA no longer had the resources with which to provide BTOP grant recipients, what effect would that have on Merit's ability to implement its project and to comply with federal requirements pursuant to ARRA?
I think that would have a severe impact.
Which way?
And that would hurt us in our ability to comply with the oversight requirements. We would have to dedicate more staff time to talk to more different people to try and make the decisions on our own, and some of the decisions that we would make would in fact be incorrect because we just don't have the experience and the access that the staff of the NTIA has.
So you're telling us you need him?
Yes, very much.
Very well. Now this question to Mr. Zinser, Ms. Fong, and Mr. Goldstein. Will, and this is a yes or no question, will a future lack of dedicated oversight funding for NTIA and RUS reduce these agencies' ability to mitigate waste, fraud, and abuse in BTOP and BIP projects? Yes or no?
Yes, sir, it would.
Ms. Fong?
Yes.
If you please.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Now, again, to Mr. Zinser, Ms. Fong, and Mr. Goldstein. Again, a yes or no question. Will future lack of dedicated oversight funding for NTIA and RUS diminish these agencies' ability to ensure BTOP and BIP projects successfully meet respective program objectives? Yes or no?
Yes, sir, it would.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, again, to Mr. Zinser, Ms. Fong, and Mr. Goldstein. And this is a yes or no question again. Do you believe NTIA and RUS require additional appropriations through 2013 dedicated to oversight of BTOP and BIP projects? Yes or no?
I don't know, sir.
Ms. Fong?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Zinser?
I would say yes, depending on the amount, sir.
Okay. But if they don't have the money to do this oversight, there is great opportunity for fraud, waste, abuse, and also misdirection of the efforts of the grant recipients. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I notice
Yes.
you're nodding yes, Mr. Shorman, too.
I agree.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you have answered my questions. I express to you my thanks. Mr. Chairman, you will note I'm under time.
We appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. We would now, next on our list is Ms. Ono Mack, who is not here. Mr. Gingrey.
Oh, Shaft.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
My friend.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And first of all, thank all the witnesses. That's fine on the fourth issue, oversight of federal funds spent by NTIA and RUS broadband. As we have seen with the $7 billion dedicated to increase in connectivity across the country, it's critically important that we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars and that we avoid past mistakes moving forward. And I think certainly it sounds like from Mr. Shorman's testimony that that's a glaring example of a mistake. But at a time when already 95% of the country has access to broadband, how do we ensure that the remaining 5% of the country has access to one of the biggest economic catalysts we have at our disposal? I'm also glad that we're using this hearing as a way to open up the discussion on what to do with return funds from NTIA and RUS. At a time when we're facing almost a $14 trillion debt. I believe it's absolutely necessary that we return any unspent funds to the Treasury. And I look forward to working with members of the subcommittee in a bipartisan way on discussing draft legislation that we have before us. To that end, there's several items I'd like to ask about the panel. I realize my time is limited, but let me begin with the Inspector General. Both Mr. Zinser and Ms. Fong, how will the release of the National Broadband Map next Thursday, February 17th, impact your ability to determine where there is either waste, fraud, and abuse, and BTOP and BIP are overbilled in areas that are already connected?
Sir, I think that one thing that the agency did to try to compensate for not having that map is they did reach out to the state governments when the applications for broadband grants were received and asked the governors of each state whether these applications were consistent with the broadband goals of the state. So I think one thing that you would want to look at with the new map is whether the governor's offices were on target with respect to their vetting of those applications.
I think the map will be very helpful to us as we do an assessment to see whether the awards that were made in the appropriate way, taking into account already existing service in areas.
Yeah, well, thank both of you for that response, and I think you could gather from the testimony, at least on this side of the aisle, that we think that the map is absolutely essential, and to go forward before having the map certainly seems to be putting the proverbial cart before the horse. Ms. Fong, your testimony, you discussed in length the 2005 audit of our U.S. In that audit, you questioned the practice of devoting significant portions of its resources to funding competitive service in areas with pre-existing providers, somewhat like Mr. Shorman was describing. You found that 66% of the projects were in areas that had pre-existing broadband access, despite the fact that the law established in the broadband program made it clear that these funds were intended to be used first for, quote, eligible rural communities in which broadband service is not available to residential customers, unquote. Your 2009 audit found that 34 of the 37 applications approved were in areas with at least one broadband provider. Is there a culture of overbuilding? Do you think anything has changed? What are your concerns with the broadband loan program going forward?
We think this is a very difficult policy issue, and that's represented by the fact that over the last few years there have been several different legislative provisions that address the issue of underserved, unserved, and what's the appropriate level of service. And going forward, we are committed to working with Russ to make sure that they abide by the terms of the law. I understand that the Recovery Act provisions differ from the Farm Bill provisions, which differ from the provisions that existed in 2005. And so it's a very complex area for us to administer. But we are focused on that, and we think it's an issue that needs constant oversight.
I realize it's a difficult area, but it's time for the federal government to quit pouring taxpayer dollars down a proverbial sinkhole. And that's what this is all about, as I'm sure you understand. I guess I'm about out of time, but quickly, Mr. Shorman, in your testimony you stated that there's already a significant market for broadband in Hays, Kansas. Yet you've raised concerns regarding $101 million award to one of your competitors. Can you please discuss with the subcommittee what impact that will have on competition in that area, and how do you think will negatively impact your ability to run your own business and to continue to employ the number of people that you employ?
That's a challenge when you have those kind of dollars in that size of community. It's a massive amount of money that's there. When you have 99.9%, as reported by the Kansas Corporation Commission, of customers in our county, in a county seat, already served by multiple broadband providers, it then becomes a very competitive process, and frankly, it just makes it just more difficult to do business. If that company takes a chunk of our business, those are private investment dollars and company in our employees that somewhere along the line we're going to have to figure out how to operate our company differently to compete. There's going to be more dollars spent on marketing. For example, you drive down Main Street, they talk about television as their new product that they're offering, not broadband. Yes. And so the whole process is just dollars going to compete with a private industry, and it's our tax dollars that are going there.
I thank the witness. I thank the chairman for his indulgence, and I'll yield back.
Yeah. And I'll just, for the other members too, if you can kind of get your question in time for the witness to respond on your time, that would be a good thing.
Well, the gentleman talks slow. He's from Georgia.
Yeah, well, we have interpreters.
I'm out of breath.
Regular order. We're going to go, I believe Mr. Waxman has stepped out. We go to Mr. Doyle next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing. I think it's regrettable that we don't have the NTIA and our U.S. administrators here. I know there's reasons we don't, but I'm saying it would have really helped to give us some perspective.
And we will have another hearing where they're here. They're out of the country at a conference and unable to attend, so we wanted to get this panel in before.
Yeah, I understand. It's not a criticism of you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just saying I think we'd have better perspective to hear Ms. Fong talk about things that are pre-stimulus funds, pre-farm bill, and make allegations of mismanagement of RUS. It'd be nice to have the administrator to at least respond to that. I'd be interested in what he had to say, he or she had to say. Mr. Shorman, I certainly have sympathy for what you're saying, but it also would have been interesting to have the administrator here to hear their side of the story. We're being told that during the public comment period that you made comment and that they actually sent field staff, boots on the ground, to review the coverage area and the proposed application, found it to be valid. We're being told that the area in dispute is 7.6 square miles of an application that covers 4,600 square miles. 99% of the proposed territory is vast rural area. This received letters of support from Congressman Jerry Moran and Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins, in addition to 118 other area letters of support. And the estimated expenditure in Hayes, where you're claiming to have competition, we're being told by the administrator is $18 million. Not half, $18 million of the $101 million awarded. Now, I don't know if your figure's correct or their figure's correct, and unfortunately, we don't have both of them here. I would love to have you both here, and maybe at a future hearing we'll do that. But since this overbuilding seems to be such an issue, Mr. Goldstein, I want to get some perspective from you on this overbuilding issue. In your testimony, you noted that GAO reviewed 32 award recipient applications from round one of the funding process and found that the agencies consistently reviewed the applications and substantiated information submitted by the applicants. As you know, there's a number of providers that have alleged that Recovery Act dollars are going into projects that compete unfairly with incumbent networks. So I want to ask you a couple questions about that. In the cases that you observed, did you find that the agencies engaged in overbuild analysis? Did they do analysis on whether there was overbuilding?
Yes, sir. In all cases where that occurred, they did do an analysis.
Okay, and so in the cases you observed, did the agencies or their contractors research the company's claims of overbuilding, people that claimed there was overbuilding going? Did they actually go out and research this?
The files we looked at showed some substantiation. I don't know if in every single case they went out. I could certainly get back to you on that.
How did they go about this research? What did NTIA do? What did RUS do to do this research?
They reviewed materials that were submitted. They interviewed people. They looked at various available maps that were from the states. They looked at any public comments that had been made. As you know, there's a 30-day public comment period with respect to these issues. And they did the due diligence that the criteria that were established required them to do.
In the cases that you reviewed, were any of the claims of overbuild substantiated?
In the cases we looked at, there was some overbuilding, but as you know, ARRA and the NOFA both allow for it, and so they made a decision to go forward nonetheless in those cases.
Did you interview the industry regarding the processes created by NTIA and RUS?
We did do some interviews with industry and industry associations at that time. We reviewed all the criteria that were in place. We felt, for the most part, that the criteria that had been developed were sufficient, but as you look back at the reports we did, we were concerned with whether or not there would be sufficient resources to implement it. Now, you will recall from my testimony, we only reviewed the first round. We did not look at the second round. There wasn't enough time. And so, obviously, during the second round, there was more money that was spent, there were fewer criteria, and it was at a faster pace. So, it remains to be seen whether or not that same level of due diligence occurred. We don't know the answer to that.
Did the industry representatives or trade associations confirm that their constituents who had applied for and received broadband funding had undergone their due diligence reviews?
We talked to many people, and they told us that they were being interviewed, that a lot of information was passing back and forth, and that the agencies were absolutely in contact with them as needed.
Did you interview any company that received funding?
That received funding, we talked to a number of companies regarding the process. At that point in time, funding had really not occurred.
Is it your opinion that the agency's review processes were thorough and rigorous?
Based on what we looked at in the first round, yes, sir, they were.
Thank you. I think that's my time. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his questions and the panel for their answers. And now I go to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here today. And Mr. Shorman, is RTS, is that a private company? I don't know the answer to that. Is that private or is that like a cooperative?
It's a cooperative telephone company that started in Lenora, Kansas, I believe.
Okay. And so Hayes is only 7 miles and there's 400 square miles or 400. Was the remainder of their territory underserved?
The way they set it out is that the Hayes area is actually about 8 square miles. If we're serving with this broadband plan square miles, that's one thing. But if we're serving customers that are actually getting broadband, nearly half of the customers.
Why are there more incumbents in Hayes than there are in the rest of the district?
That is correct.
That's where the money is.
However, there's incumbents in other parts of the area for our wireless. We have wireless service. There are other providers in other parts of that area.
But outside of Hayes, is it an underserved? You'd say it's an underserved area they're serving?
In some areas, yes. Some areas, no. And I'm not arguing about the unserved areas.
Right.
Where I'm talking about is where over almost half of the people are in that 1 8
But I see with overbuild, just from my West Point economics background, is if you're getting subsidized, go to the underserved, but you're also getting into the served, then, I mean, you really don't want to go into the underserved unless you can get into the served, because that's where you're going to make money. Your subsidy, you're going to make money because you're getting subsidized to go to the underserved, but you're going to make your profits. The money is in Hayes, it appears. And that's why, I mean, would you want to build out in the other areas even though you're subsidized? And that's the question, I mean, you got to get into that. So when people look at overbuilds, it's really an incentive to get in and compete with what you're trying to do, and it puts you at a disadvantage. I mean, there's no other way to, I know that's what your beef for coming here, as we talked earlier, is that you can't compete with that.
Well, if the overbuilds and take money away from private industry,
well, that's what's happening.
So they can move out there, it seems like the wrong way to go.
Yeah,
use the funds to reach the unserved areas and reach those people that really need it,
well,
not to compete.
It's going to end up with one player.
Yeah, eventually.
It's going to end up with one player. And
that has happened in that region in some other areas.
Okay. My understanding of your testimony, I think your written indicated there was a map that you looked at of the application for the person who was received the award that didn't have Hayes in the map.
The initial map that came out had, and I'll call them donut holes around Hayes and some of the other areas. And when we looked at that map, we really had trouble. We tried to ask the RUS about this. And even though we had a donut hole that looked like Hayes was not included, we contacted them, told them what we were doing. We also told them that there were other competitors, AT&T and RTS's own affiliate, Nextech, that were also providing services in that little area. So we tried to do that, and frankly, when the word came out, we were really surprised that it even covered that because of that donut hole. When we went back, and after a lot of work and a lot of time, the next map that we finally got out of the RUS showed Hayes was all included.
But the map that was submitted with the application did not have...
The first map that came out on the website showing where the application, where it was intended to be, had a donut hole
Hayes
over the Hayes area.
Okay. And then, Ms. Fong, you said earlier, well, in your testimony, and actually Mr. Gingrey asked a question that said, in the 2005 audit, I know that was not Recovery Act, you had 60% of the projects were in pre-existing access, even though the law requires funds not to do that. And you said that you have different language between Recovery Act and the agriculture. Is Recovery Act more restrictive or less restrictive on overbuild? The language in the Recovery Act?
It's less restrictive. It allows Recovery Act projects to be funded where there are providers already. And I think the way Russ has implemented this is to, in its application process, to give credit for certain kinds of factors. Mm-hmm. But yes, the Recovery Act is a little more flexible than the law that was in effect in 2005.
Okay. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We would now go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for being here today. While no program of this magnitude can be perfect, the broadband recovery program, particularly the BTOP program, will expand broadband access to more and more Americans. Like many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, a few projects in my home district of Sacramento were awarded to improve broadband adoption capabilities. Anchor institutions like community colleges, such as the Los Rios Community College District in my district, were awarded grants to provide training and digital literacy skills for local residents in my district. Last September, I, along with Ranking Member Eshoo and Congressman Markey, sent a letter to NTIA urging them to prioritize anchor institutions during the second round of funding, and I applaud the administration for doing just that. I've heard from the Sacramento Public Library, and the number one issue they face is a lack of capacity and suitable bandwidth or speeds to serve their customers in this time of economic stress. I have a question for Dr. Welch. Will Merit Networks be providing direct fiber connections to schools, libraries, healthcare providers, or will it be providing middle mile capacity, or both?
Yes, ma'am, both.
Both, okay.
And we were also linked in with a Public Computing Center award from Michigan State, where we'll be directly connecting many of those sites that were funded by the BTOP program.
Okay. If it wasn't for the ARRA grants, would the localities have the resources to connect anchor institutions?
No, ma'am. Well, so definition of connecting being dark fiber, and no, ma'am, they would not.
Okay. Mr. Zinser, do you believe that the BTOP program has adequately served the anchor institution community?
Congresswoman, I know that the second round did put emphasis on connecting to anchor institutions, and I would agree that I think that the second round did accomplish that.
Okay. Dr. Welch again. One of the requirements of the goals of BTOP was to encourage collaborative projects in a wide array of participants that might benefit from the effort. So cooperation with state and local officials as well as local institutions was highly encouraged. I know that the state of California was very active on this because we heard from them a lot during the grant process. What kind of collaboration did you engage in for your project?
Ma'am, we collaborated both at the state level with state agencies. We collaborated with other people who were applying so that we would interlink our projects and make sure that they were synergistic. We collaborated with commercial providers who are subrecipients. And then, of course, we collaborated with all the local governments, the community anchor institutions, the state 911 agency to try and make sure that we could meet everybody's needs. And as you know, it's an optimization problem, so you try and move a little bit here and there, but get the best result for the region.
Did you actually do outreach to do that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So do you think that your project is stronger because of this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you're willing to go on record saying that this is something that should have happened all over the country, in essence, in order to extend the reach, particularly for anchor institutions?
Yes, ma'am. I'm extremely proud of what we're doing in Michigan, and I think it's going to be a great thing for Michigan.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. And now we'll go to the vice chair of the committee, Mr. Terry.
Who will be on time next time. The want to follow up a little bit on what Mr. Doyle was talking about. And Mr. Shorman, as you may know, we've worked on USF a little bit, a few draft bills. The last couple draft bills has focused on more of a micro look at rural companies and excluding from USF places like Hayes that has competition from being able to receive USF funds. So while one area of government is trying to make sure that areas, those pockets of 20,000 in Nebraska is in the same way, most rural areas have pockets of 15, 20,000 that are well served. What we're trying to find is are those towns of 200, 300 that are not. Maybe no access, or they call broadband 250 kilobits and don't have the infrastructure to get to 10, or even in today's world 30 may be what's needed. So the point that I want to bring up, Mike hit on this, as I understand from your opponents in this, they said, well, you only have 3% of the project area, therefore it's all rural. You would disagree, I assume, with that assessment that you should just, if the project area is large enough that a town of 20,000 is only 3% of the geographical area, we shouldn't worry about it.
Well, I'm only a farm boy, but it seems silly to me that we're not serving square miles. We're serving customers in these areas outside of here. And to take and grow a map big enough, I assume at some point you get a big enough map you could make L.A. a rural town. That doesn't make sense.
So I want to go then to Mr. Goldstein, Ms. Fong. Well, first of all, does GAO or Inspector General then offer reports back to RUS and NTIA that says you should have a deeper level, of more of a granular definition of unserved, where larger communities that have 2 or 3 providers should be excluded? Do you make those type of recommendations?
No, sir, we don't. We make recommendations related specifically to audit findings based on criteria that an agency has established or that were in law.
All right. Ms. Fong, how about with the Inspector General's report?
We would go in and look at the language of the Recovery Act that authorizes this program and attempt to assess how Russ implemented that and whether the criteria they applied make sense and comply with the statute. And I think what I'm hearing today is a very interesting discussion about how do you define rural area. Is it square feet? Is it number of users? It's a very interesting issue that I have not focused on, but I appreciate your raising that.
Well, and we're doing it in the drafting of the USF bill, so I know it can be done. But anyway, just Ms. Fong and Mr. Goldstein, on rescissions of contracts or
loans,
pools of money out there, have any been rescinded, do you know of, from RUS under the Stimulus Act?
I don't know. The awards were all made by September 30th of 2010, so it's unlikely that anything has been rescinded. It's now February, but I don't know that for sure.
The gentleman yield. I think sure. One under B-top.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Would that be your understanding too, Mr. Zinser?
Yes, sir. About $300 million, I think, was rescinded at one point.
All right. And I think during the first line of questioning or opening with Mr. Walden, you met Ms. Fong. You said that when it's rescinded, that $300 million goes back to the agency, and it's used then at their discretion. Is that a fair statement?
I'm going to defer to my
In the case of the BTOP program, the Congress directed that it be used for a different program. It took it away from BTOP and used it for a different program. That was an act of Congress. Okay. I think the way the Recovery Act is set up for BTOP, if for whatever reason grant money does get returned to the agency, the Recovery Act, I think at this point, does provide the administrator with the discretion of reissuing that money to another grantee.
So it doesn't go back to the Treasury. So
well, it's complicated. As I mentioned, the Dodd-Frank legislation about deobligated money and what happens to that, and there are provisions for the administrator to actually transfer the grants to another grantee before they would become deobligated. So there are you really have to drill down into those issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we go to Mr. Towns, New York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and of course, Ranking Member, for having this hearing. And of course, let me indicate to you, I'm happy to be back as well. Mr. Zinser, perhaps you can help us figure out what an appropriate level of funding might be for such oversight going forward. I don't expect you to provide us with a dollar amount, but to give us some general views or feelings in terms of what a model should be in terms of oversight. And I'm also going to ask you too, Ms. Fong. Yes.
Well, the budget request for NTIA for FY11 was about $24 million at the end. I think they had originally asked for more than that, and eventually the request from the President for NTIA for FY11 was about $24 million. And that would have funded a number of staff at NTIA to actually be charged with overseeing specific grants. For our work, the Recovery Act appropriated about $10 million for my staff. If you look at my overall budget compared to the department, it's a little less than that proportion, but my view is that I'm going to deliver the best oversight I can with whatever resources I get.
Right. In other words, you're sort of saying that might not be enough?
It might not be enough, sir. If we start getting a lot of complaints and a lot of allegations of fraud, for example, it could get very expensive to go out and actually investigate each one of those with 230 plus grants out there.
Ms. Fong?
The RUS has an oversight program in place because, as you may know, the broadband program has pre-existed the Recovery Act for about 10 years. And we understand that they have a system whereby they've contracted out with an external contractor to help them for the next 2 years. They also have in place employees who are on site across the nation to look at auditing the receipts that come in against the grants and also to do compliance reviews of recipients. It's our understanding that RUS believes that this framework will work well for them. I do not have a sense of whether they believe that they need more resources or not. Their request for FY11 is about $300 million to run the whole program, and that would include both grant and loan authority as well as oversight. At this point, I would suggest that perhaps someone ask the RUS administrator their view on that in terms of oversight funding.
And my concern is that, we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, and even stupidity. We even add that. But the point is that many times, though, we're not prepared to fund, and to be able to go and to look and to see. And that's really my concern. So that's the reason why I raised this question, because I think that we make a mistake when we don't have the resources to go out and do it, because that's waste. And I think that we cannot afford the luxury of waste in any kind of way today. So on that note, Mr. Chairman, as again, I'm delighted to be back, and I yield back.
We're delighted to have you back, and we'll take back the time and give it to Mr. Latta. Mr. Latta, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all the folks who are here today. It's been very, very enlightening today on your testimony. Boy, I tell you, there's a lot of questions I'd like to ask in just a short period of time, but if I could, Mr. Shorman, let me just go back to what Mr. Shimkus was saying a little bit earlier. I just want to make sure that we're clear for the record that your application was to serve those in unserved areas, and that the award that was given to RTS, and that was going to serve about at least 50% of an area that's already been served. Is that correct?
That is close to correct, yes.
Okay, and something else in your testimony I thought was also interesting that really, unfortunately, we don't have time to have you give the entire testimony, but you have 277 employees.
Yes.
And you got 212 of which are employee owners through your employee stock ownership plan. But I also found it interesting in your testimony on page 2. And this really goes to a crux of a lot of things that happen with a lot of our companies in our areas, and what happens sometimes when government puts people out of business. Sometimes it says here in your paragraph that your Eagle Cares program, that you have a partnership with the Salvation Army, that you help needy individuals with their telephone, internet, and cable payments. You've helped deliver Meals on Wheels to retirees when there's bad weather that's kept their drivers off the road. You donated an emergency heart defibrillator units to the community schools. You raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for children by sponsoring an annual telethon. What happens when government puts you to a point that you can't compete? And what happens to your employees, and what happens to all your community work?
I'm so proud of our employees. We are employee-owned. Our 277 employees, which 212 are employee owners, they participate in the upside and downside of the company. When we have a competitive overbuild like what's happened and happened in other communities, it affects each one of our employees and their ability to go out and do these types of things. And I'm proud of what they do.
Let me just follow up real quick on that. Do you foresee that you might, with the competition that is coming through this grant, that you might end up having to lose employees?
We have to survive as a company. And when customers go away or taken away by a government overbuild, then we have to make adjustments there. And that would cost us employees and would cost our company and the shareholders, which are once again, the employee owner.
Okay, thank you very much. If Ms. Fong, if I could ask you, I found your written testimony very interesting. You say on page 3 of your testimony that in 2005 you made the report that there were 14 recommendations, and in the response, RUS did not agree with how the OIG portrayed the broadband grant and loan programs, and for the next several years, the OIG worked with RUS to resolve those recommendations. And then in 2009, you revisited the broadband programs, and you found that 8 of the 14 recommendations had not had corrective adequate, or I should say adequate corrective action at that time. You go on to say in your testimony that from 2005 through 2009, RUS continued providing questionable loans to providers near very large cities or in areas of pre-existing service. And that you go on to state that they had RUS delayed in responding because of the 2008 Farm Bill. But you also state that as of January of 2011, the Office of the Chief Financial Officer has not accepted RUS's actions as adequate to close 10 of those 4 original recommendations from 2005. And I guess it really comes down to my question is this. You know, when all these things are going on, all these years are passing, what action can you be taking, especially based on your experience of what percentage of the grants, of these grant awards can be expected to have problems with waste, fraud, and abuse? And how many of those do you think might be unused and be reclaimed?
Well, that would be the focus of our planned audit work for later this spring. What we plan to do is to go back and take a look at how RUS is implementing the Recovery Act program in the context of the recommendations that we had made in the previous audits. And we recognize that some of those recommendations have been overtaken by events, but we are also very concerned about a number of them that go to the management of the program. In a nutshell, we're concerned that it appears RUS does not yet have final regulations to implement its broadband program. It lacks written staff guidance to help the staff make decisions on how to award, service, and deal with loans and deobligate and cancel loans. And so we are very interested in going in and looking at the management controls of that program to see if that program could really run a lot more effectively. While we do that, we will be looking at individual grants and loans to see if there are instances where some of those funds could be gotten back, and we will let RUS know about that.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. We now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey. Yeah, I believe that I'll go to the gentlelady from California for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you. I do have a unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman, to place some things in the record. There are 2 letters in support of the rural telephone and Nextech's broadband expansion proposals from Lynn Jenkins and from Jerry Moran, Congressman Moran. These were referenced earlier. And then these are letters of support for the RTS project from the First National Bank of Hays, Kansas, the Ellis County Commission of Hays, Kansas, the Ellis County Coalition for Economic Development, the Hays Medical Center, the Hays Public Library, the North Central Kansas Technical College of Hays, Kansas, and the Fort Hays State University of Hays, Kansas. So I appreciate this, and I'd like to place these in the record.
Without objection, now I'd recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey. You're the last one, so it's hard to pass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you. If there is a proxy for economic development in a country, it is the deployment of broadband. And when 2 days ago we celebrated the 15th anniversary of the signing of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, February 8th, 1996. 15 years ago, today, not one home in America had broadband. 15 years ago today, not one home in America had broadband. 15 years later, Google, eBay, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube, on and on and on. 2 million jobs, branded, made in America. We won. We're not doing that in clean energy yet. China is trying to do that. We don't have a plan, but that's a great economic opportunity for us. That's another committee right now that is having that here.
In the stimulus bill, I was able to add language which required that each of these grants have open access as a part of the condition. Mr. Shorman, is that important to have open access as a part of ensuring part of the deployment of broadband in our country?
If open access is available and is easily usable, that can be important.
So what challenges would your business face if we had to, if open access was a part of receiving funds under the Recovery Act?
You have to be able to have a workable plan with the company that you would be getting access from.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have found in some other experiences is that has been difficult to make happen.
And why is it difficult?
It appears there's a boatload of rules that you have to go through to make things happen, which create barriers.
A boatload of rules that the other companies have.
That's correct.
Okay. The companies, there are a lot of companies that don't really believe in open access.
That's exactly right.
They create those rules as the obstacles.
And so in the pure sense, having open access is very important.
Oh, it's so
in reality, it becomes a lot more difficult to make happen.
It's so important, because, as you know, Verizon and AT&T turned down the contract to build the Internet. And then at each juncture, they've turned down the opportunity to go into the Internet until we did the 96 Act, and then they sued. They called it a bill of attainder in the Supreme Court. They tried to stop it, after we passed the 96 Act, Verizon and Pac Bell. So there are problems, without question. Can you provide, Mr. Goldstein, a specific example where the Recovery Act does not provide the authority for the return to the Treasury of unused or reclaimed broadband funding, but that this draft bill would?
We haven't looked at that specifically, sir. I will take a look and get back to your office. I'd be happy to.
Yeah, please. Thank you. And on the issue of total percent of Americans which now do not have broadband, I know that those numbers came up earlier. Could you tell me what those numbers are? Ms. Fong, do you know the answer to that?
I do not know.
Does anyone out there know the answer to that question?
We can get back to you, sir. We'll take a look.
Okay, I think that's important. This is all part of a plan for the future for our country, so that we're capturing all of the opportunities which broadband presents for economic development in rural America and inner city America, so that everyone is participating. The E-rate, which I was able to include in the 1996 Act, that ensured that all schools, the poorest schools, all have access to it, so that the kids get the skill set, really doesn't divide along regional lines. It's for every kid in America, so that they have it in their schools. But this broadband plan actually helps them to get it in their homes as well. And I just can't think of a more important thing that we could be doing to ensure that our economic growth continues unabated without this kind of a program in place. It ensures that it's uniform and that it captures the future. It captures what our country has to be all about in the 21st century. And on a bipartisan basis, I think we should all work towards that goal of empowering every human being, children especially, to be able to maximize their God-given abilities by having access to broadband, because it is the indispensable skill set that will make them competitive with a portable skill set that they can use anywhere in our country or the world in their lives here in the 21st century on this planet. And that's really what that provision was all about in the stimulus bill. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. We appreciate it. We now go to Mr. Scalise for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shorman, does your company use your private investment to make the investments that you've made to build out the network in rural communities?
Yes, in a sense, we have a traditional banking relationship where we go and put our plan together, and they in turn fund our projects.
So you're risking your private capital to go build out the network, and then, of course, as you risk that, it's the business model is that you're investing that capital so that you can ultimately create this infrastructure that ultimately people would be able to use, and then you can get that money back instead of having taxpayer money go to build it out.
It's kind of the American way to be able to take money, build something, build a product, sell it, and then get money back and pay off your loans. Correct.
It seems like for too long that model's worked so well, and and now in the last few years it seems like government wants to come along and take the place of what the private sector did. And of course, from all the results, the government's not doing a real good job of it, and we're drowning in a sea of red ink in the process. When you look at what happened with these RUS grants, does taxpayer money being used to, in essence, fund your competitor serve as an incentive or disincentive for you to make future investments?
Well, it's certainly a disincentive in our areas where there's an overbuilder that's using, again, it's my tax dollars also that are being used to compete against me along with our other employee owners. So exactly to that point, it does cause us to have to look at where we spend our money and what we can do with that money.
What kind of jobs are related to the investments you've made so far? How many jobs have you created along the way with this private investment, the risk that you've taken as a company? What kind of jobs is that equated to?
Well, our company has not quite doubled in size with some of the acquisitions that we've had. We also do our own fiber install. We do our own technology training. We do things throughout our company that continues to grow. And because our employee owners live in those same communities, it's not like we're a big corporation. We're a small company based in Hays, Kansas, that covers that area in north central and northwest.
How many people work for your company?
277, give or take, a few along the line. And we have 212 of those are employee owners that own stock in the company, and the employees own 63% of our company.
And what's the average pay for these jobs?
Boy, it can vary. It can vary from $20,000, $30,000 a year to higher than that in certain areas.
Again, sounds like the American dream, creating a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunities for people. When the stimulus bill was going through, one of the claims that was going to be made was that this would increase broadband deployment, especially in rural areas, and create jobs. From your experience, is the program reaching the unserved, or is it just jeopardizing some of the things that have already been done by the private sector?
I think in some of the letters that were presented earlier, this process was proposed to reach unserved rural northwest Kansas people. That is a great project. If it reaches unserved customers, that's a terrific way for this money to be spent. However, in reality, the biggest part of that, or a major part of that, is overbuilding existing operations and existing broadband providers.
And that kind of duplication just wasn't what was promised to the American people.
That's not what we understood it to be.
Appreciate that. Mr. Goldstein, you state that the RUS plans to use its existing oversight framework that it uses for grant and loan program. Given the problems the Inspector General Fong has reported on about URS, is this an effective oversight plan to prevent the defaults and de-obligations RUS has experienced in the past?
I think we'd have to wait and see, sir. We don't know yet.
All right, Mr. Fong, I'm sorry, Ms. Fong, do you want to comment on that?
That would be one of the things that we will be looking at most likely in our audit. I will say that in the past, RUS has, in its oversight capacity, when it's identified instances of wrongdoing in the program, they have come to us and made referrals to us, and those have resulted in successful prosecutions. So we do know that, at least on some level, their oversight program has been effective.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Zinser, I understand that auditing grants at this time is very difficult because even though the money's been awarded, the grantees have not done much yet. What are you planning to do to ensure that the taxpayer money is not misspent?
We've got a number of steps we have to take. Number one is we're going to see how well NTIA is overseeing their portfolio of grants. We've got to make sure that the program office is doing its job. We are going to go through a process of identifying the grants into a risk assessment and identify the riskiest grants. NTIA is doing a similar process.
Do you know how long it will take to really get a formula in place to know how well this taxpayer money is being spent?
We're going to be initiating grants very soon. I don't know that a complete formula will be developed, but one of the things we're going to do, for example, is the Recovery Board, the Recovery and Accountability Transparency Board, has set up a capacity of checking grantees across a number of public source databases for risk indicators. We're going to use that capacity to identify potential audit targets.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I want to thank our panelists for your participation in the hearing today. I think it's helped us think about this program and look at the legislation that's been drafted. If you have comments and suggestions about how we can improve the draft legislation, we would welcome those not only from our panelists but others who are observing these proceedings, and certainly from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I'd like to thank our witnesses and members that participated in today's hearing. I would remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask that the witnesses all agree to respond promptly to those questions. I will note for the record your head nods in favor of that. And with that, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Thank you.